Hey there riders, Moto Journo Kris here today, and I'm here with Yamaha's R7, and this is the LA version. Now, the MT-07 first appeared in 2013 and became very popular for offering an absolutely exceptional 650 class bike, which had a cracker of an engine in it, a really good kind of overall package, despite being quite basic in a lot of ways by today's standards. And overall, it was just a really fun machine to ride. And of course, since that time, people have been asking for a sports bike version of the MT-07, even if that was some people just thinking, you know, a fairing kit would be really cool. While of course, it's taken a significant amount of time for Yamaha to release the R7. And I've got the R7 LA, which is the LAMS or beginner version. It's the 655cc version of that parallel twin engine, the 270-degree crank, and it is designed for new riders. And I will say the R7 itself is a compromise between the 650 class of bike and of course the super sport style of bike. Now, the ergos come from the super sport, and to a smaller extent probably that suspension, which is fully adjustable. However, the rest of the bike is, realistically speaking, a 650 class bike. So you're getting a dual disc brake setup, 4-pot calipers, really good brake performance, but not too aggressive. So it's not going to be too overwhelming for new riders. It's not going to catch new riders out. The level of performance there is really exceptional, however, and it is backed up by ABS. That parallel twin engine, it's nice and linear, it's torquey, it's a big step up from something like the Ninja 400 or the R3. However, in realistic terms, it's the torque which is going to make a day-to-day difference for you as a rider. And that is what you're looking for in the 650 class when you're looking at a restricted bike like this. Obviously, there is quite a significant step up in price if you're looking at Yamaha's R7 over some of the 300 to 400cc options. However, I think it does justify that price. It's a little bit of a shame they couldn't bring it a little bit cheaper. I think if this thing was, around that 12K mark, it'd be an absolute killer. But it is sitting at the 14K mark, which is a little bit higher than most of the 650s. However, keeping in mind you're getting the fully adjustable suspension, and it's a new model, and it's fairly fancy, realistically speaking. And that's also $1,000 cheaper than the full power, the HO R7. Now, it'd be easy to criticize Yamaha for kind of not doing the full super sport treatment with the R7, but that's not the kind of bike it is. And particularly when we think about the LA version, which is more beginner centric, it is really an exceptional overall package. While the ergonomics are the super sport style, which is the less forgiving style of ergonomic for new riders, otherwise, I think this is an absolutely exceptional machine. And if you're a new rider looking for a real sports or kind of race style or track style bike, this is really your only option to do that really properly in the 650 class. Now, while I'm talking about kind of the really cool features on this bike, this does have the Bridgestone S22 tires. If you're a new rider, that may not mean a lot, but that is an exceptional starter tire. It is a great all-rounder, it's sporty, it's good in the wet, it's just a great tire, a very good tire. It is great to see that kind of tire fitted as standard fitment on Yamaha's R7 LA, and that will probably spoil you as a new rider as far as the level of grip that you're getting. Now, that in combination with that suspension setup and the overall geometry of this particular machine gives it a very easygoing nature, a very neutral handling nature. It's a really easy thing to ride. It's 188 kilos, so a little bit heavier, about 20 kilos heavier than the 300 to 400s. However, it carries that weight really well. As I said, a neutral handler. The tire profile and the geometry make it kind of a very steady and linear transition onto the side of the tire, so it's not overly aggressive, it's not stodgy. Very nice thing to ride and very nice thing to push hard on, as well as being an agile machine for those lower speeds and everyday kind of riding around town. And certainly you could do your everyday riding on the R7, no problems at all. The seat is quite comfortable. The riding ergos do put more weight on your arms and your wrists if you don't have the core strength and you can't hold on with your legs, but that's a sports bike. So sure, it would have been really nice to get a bit more performance out of the R7 in the full power version, but obviously in the LA version that I'm testing today, they are limited to the 655cc version. You only get about 50 horsepower in the 650 class. but you're getting, you know, heaps and heaps of torque in comparison to the smaller capacity machines. And as I said, the character of this particular engine, it has a beautiful way of putting the power to the ground. I think that's to do with the pulses. And while as a new rider, that's probably not going to mean anything to you, I would say it is one of the most forgiving and confidence inspiring of the 650 class machines. And I particularly have ridden the MTO7 a lot, and I love that bike. The engine characteristic in this, they have made it a little bit less torquey, which is actually going to make it a little bit more forgiving down low. Very nice throttle open, really nice kind of linear feel down low if you're not smashing open that throttle. However, it just goes like a bat out of hell if you are being quite aggressive as you build up your skills and you have a bit more fun on this bike. So there's a lot of room to grow in a machine like the R7 LA. On the more disappointing side, of course, is the exhaust note. It's got enormous collector, not the nicest looking exhaust, even though it is low, like kind of low on the bike, and you can kind of see the collector there. It's hard to criticize it. That is just the standard these days. But I will say that while the soundtrack of the bike isn't that impressive, that could probably be solved with an aftermarket exhaust, and you will need to buy a full exhaust system because of the style of exhaust they put on these as standard fitment. Oh, shit. But I'm gonna say that's probably a good investment if you like something a little bit louder. While if your concern is not upsetting any of your neighbors, you are not gonna have an issue. It's got a nice kind of intake growl if you rev it hard enough, but generally speaking, it's not going to stand out for the exhaust or the intake note. It is what it is with these style bikes. You are getting a really cool overall style machine. As you can see, you're getting the full fairings in the Yamaha blue, along with kind of like this graphite blacky kind of color. I wouldn't have minded it in the full glossy blue because it would stand out more, and certainly capturing kind of the depth in that metal flaked fairing, as you can see here, was a little bit more difficult. I don't know if you can see it, but on the front of the bike there is an enormous wasp, which is really obviously also quite impressed with that front guard. As long as it's happy with that and not trying to sting me, I'm going to be happy as well. Comfortable seat here, surprisingly comfortable for a sports bike, but obviously this bike is many compromises. You know, I would say it's a road sport. And in that regard, while it does have the more aggressive overall seating position, it's a great overall machine, even for a new rider. A little bit more challenging, of course, to jump onto just because of those sports bike ergos or those super sport style ergos, but that shouldn't chase you away, because if that's what you want, that's what you want, and that's what the R7 offers. We've also got these rear set style pegs here. I do find once you get your toes up on the pegs and you really lock into the bike, you lock in very, very nicely. For me at 180 centimeters, 32-inch inseam or so, that works perfectly for me. Obviously, if you're a new rider and you're finding yourself getting pushed into the tank too much, it's because you're basically not using your legs and the pegs properly to hold yourself onto the bike. And the brakes are strong enough that you may find yourself in that kind of situation where if you're braking hard, you're sliding forward if you haven't locked yourself into the bike properly. But, you know, that's the style of bike it is again, and that's something that you as a rider need to learn to deal with and to ride around. And once you do that, you'll be a lot happier on the bike. I also found moving around on the bike itself quite easy, even with my big backpack on, which, you know, that's 15 kilos on its own. That does restrict my movement a little bit, especially in full gear. But even so, I could move around on the R7 quite easily, even if I wasn't getting a knee down, because this is just a road test for this particular bike. Now check out my full ergos video if you're more interested in the specific ergos of this bike. I guess I'll just go over quickly a couple of the other features that I haven't mentioned yet. Full LED lighting. It's got quite a nice level of wind protection, but if you are sitting up, kind of more upright on the bike, you're not in your crouch, you will find that you're getting a bit of wind specifically onto your helmet. Fairly good vision through those mirrors for a sports bike again, that's nice to see. As I mentioned, that seat, very, very comfortable. The tank, 12.8 litres, so not the biggest tank, maybe 250 Ks, I would say is probably a safe bet, but you want to be filling up about then. And of course, you are getting room for a pillion, not that I think that's, you know, a huge concern. And you've got the cutouts in the tail, which is a nice, really kind of sexy feature, along with that shark fin tank feature there, which is of course kind of an iconic Yamaha feature. So overall, Yamaha's R7 LA is a really formidable beginner bike option, and definitely one well worth considering. I would probably say the big caveat to considering this bike in my mind is that $14,000 buy-in here in Australia for the restricted version. While it is cheaper than for the full power version, which I'm really happy about, and it's only a small premium over most of the 650s, which basically just covers that adjustable suspension, it's a lot of money for a new rider. And I would say this is probably going to be a bit more of a niche bike even than the MT-07, simply because the R3, the Ninja 400, the RC390, while they aren't the proper full sports bike with the drop-down clip-on bars and everything like that, they are still going to be a great entry option. This particular machine, the R7 LA, is definitely for kind of a more hard-nosed rider, someone who loves their sports bikes, their real sports bikes, you know, and that's what they want as a first bike. And they also want the higher level of specifications, the more performance, and perhaps a more challenging entry point into riding. But there is certainly nothing wrong with that. And this may well also be a great machine for someone who's done, you know, a year on their L's and started their P's and is ready for an upgrade and has the money to buy something significantly better. The one caveat I would say is that the higher spec suspension and the higher kind of adjustability of the suspension also means that we're getting a harsher rear at the end of the day, and that does affect the comfort levels of this bike for your day-to-day riding. While it's great on the twisties like this, where you can really enjoy the tauter and sportier suspension setup that the more premium system gives you, it does trade off a little bit of the comfort. Now that, in comparison to the Ninja 400, is something you'd notice. However, bikes like the R3 and the RC390, for instance, they have a similar kind of sportier suspension setup, so you're probably not losing as much comfort for your everyday riding in that regard. Anyway, as I said, I'm super impressed by the R7 LA. Being a little bit cheaper than the HO version would make me seriously consider whether I wanted this bike. But I will say that I felt like the performance was just not quite at the same level as the HO, which should be the case, but normally on the MT-07 I don't notice it. It's possibly because it's got that more linear kind of power delivery that it was such an issue. Or not such an issue, but it might just be because of the way they've tuned it to be quite linear that I noticed that a little bit more. Anyway, that's my thoughts on Yamaha's R7 LA. Let me know your thoughts on this particular bike. Would you consider one? Are you considering one? Or would you go the smaller capacity beginner bike? Let me know your thoughts. As always, stay safe out there, and thanks for watching.